Hello everyone, it's Kyra Wong from the Magical Unicorn Project, and I am here today with one of our supporting men, Mr. Mark Hart. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Kyra. Happy to be here.
The starting point here is I want to know a little bit about how you were raised and that journey to where you are today.
Sure. There's a whole lot to unpack in there, but I was born in Jamaica. I am the son of some Jamaican parents, obviously, and we migrated to Canada when I was 2. Mom and Dad got divorced shortly after arriving in Canada, and so Mom raised the three of us. I'm the baby, and I've got 2 older sisters. So my whole life, I've been surrounded by women, and it's been an interesting journey, and the impact has been interesting just to see my mom have to struggle, and I know lots of other people have had similar journeys, in particular from the Caribbean, in particular of Jamaica. But it's been interesting, and it's made an impact on me, and just in terms of just seeing mom struggle and still end up working a couple of jobs. She's a nurse, working a couple of jobs and struggle, but managed to get ahead and buy her own house and just kind of move on and live a little bit of the dream, as it were. So it really helped set a really good example and show me that coming from nothing, you can actually achieve if you're focused and you put some hard work in.
So you've had a lot of success in your life and in your career, and I'm curious about how you got there, because I know you had a banking background in your journey, and I remember when I started my project seeing this chart from McKinsey & Company and leanin.org, and it just showed like all these people basically starting out at the bottom all together. So as you started going up the corporate ladder to those C-suite positions, there was pretty much no minorities or women, and it showed these color blocks, right? So the white men at the top, it was like this, and then like this much women, and like this much in terms of minorities. And I thought, wow, like you basically have to be a unicorn to get into a C-suite position.
It's been an interesting journey, and even if you go back when I left school, I left school early, so you kind of layer on to the fact that didn't graduate, minority, and when I got into the mortgage business in Kitchener-Waterloo, where I grew up, there weren't really a whole lot of people of color either in this business, right? Yeah. So that ended up being a bit of an interesting, presented some interesting challenges at the outset, but like anything else, you work and you connect and you build relationships, you add value. But as many people would say that end up being either female or minority, when you're reaching for some of those positions, you end up in some cases having to work a little harder than potentially other folks on balance, and you just get used to that being the rule, or the unwritten rule, as it were. And that's just how it is. But so initially, starting out of the gate in finance, it was interesting, and then as you move on to different positions, you get used to it, but you're never really happy with the fact that you have to get used to it. I lived in the States, and I worked for a big bank in the U.S., and I had an executive role with them, and it was interesting. They actually came up with a program to build out bench strength within the female and minority community for mid-level executives.
So what year would this be?
So this would have been 2003 in Atlanta. And this was one of the top 10 big banks in the US. And and what was really driving that wasn't really their sense of hey, this is something that we have to do. On balance, I think there's probably a small portion of that, but that wasn't the majority reason. What was driving that was they had seen a lot of other companies paying out hundreds of millions of dollars in class action lawsuits for glass ceiling practices.
So tell me about the Yellow Brick House, because this is a charity that you've been involved in for years. So I want to know why you got involved in that and why you're passionate about that.
So it's interesting. I've always wanted to give back, and in my earlier years, I was a big brother because I didn't have that. So I was a big brother for about 6 years to a number of boys when I lived in Kitchener-Waterloo, and always believed in giving back. And my mom, didn't have a ton of money, but she always gave back, and she'd do missionary trips and give half my wardrobe away to people in countries and so on and so forth. And there's a period in my life about 7 or 8 years ago when I hadn't really been doing as much as I would like in the charitable. Sure, I give to different charities when people send you an invite and you give you $100 and so on and so forth. But I hadn't actually been as actively involved in a charity. So I was looking around at a variety of different charities and came upon Yellow Brick House, and their mission at supporting abused women and their children really kind of spoke to me. So I met with the board chair and the executive director and ended up joining the board and ended up being vice chair, and actually just left the board after 7 years. And it's just a phenomenal organization and what they do. I still say we because I'm a big supporter of them. Yellow Brick House has a number of shelters for abused women and children, and as I got into the learning more about the cause, it really was fascinating to me how widespread abuse is and the many faces of abuse, whether it's physical, it's emotional, it's financial, psychological. It just has many different components to it, and it's not just for poor people or the middle class. There's lots of believe it or not, there are executive women that would otherwise appear to be strong women in their business role, but they're being psychologically abused by men and end up leaving their house with their child on the heels and in the back of a police car and taken to a shelter, and it's just, you see some of the stories and it's heartbreaking. So that's our corporate charity. We made a commitment, a 4-year, $60,000 commitment, which is significant for a small company.
Yeah, for sure.
A few years ago, and we continue to support them in a variety of different ways. And even growing, I have a son and a daughter. And my son, over the last couple of years, he kind of takes the lead at his school, raising money for Yellow Brick House, because he now understands, the impact of what's kind of gone on and what's been going on. And he understands, some of the work that Yellow Brick House does in the community. He goes to an all-boys private school, and he's kind of one of the driving forces to help Yellow Brick House raise funds at his school. You go through life, seeing the various faces of racism, and then in some cases it's very, very overt, or you get the look in the eyeball and you get the N-word, and you get it, in Canada, I would argue that it's much more covert than in the US, right? You see the marches that we've seen on CNN, the KKK and so on and so forth, and it much more of an overt culture, and I think maybe that has to do with slavery being such a prevalent thing in the in the 1800s and so on in the U.S. and so there's still some of that stuff kind of bubbling, not so deep underground, if you will, in the U.S. But I think in Canada we've had a bit of a different kind of a socialization and cultural diversity is much more accepted here and promoted by even the politicians for the most part. But I'm not naive enough to think it's still not there. And here's a classic example of how current the racism is. My kid goes to my son, before he went to the private school, we had him in a public school, and he gets the N-word on the playground. And he was having a conversation with his friend, and this guy taps him on the shoulder and says, "Why don't you just shut up?" And my son's saying, "What are you talking about? I'm not even talking to you." And the guy says, I should take you to my church and hang you on the cross and call you holy S-H-I, go on. And it just shows you, and this is at that point, my son is a 9 or 10-year-old kid, right? And this is in the Greater Toronto area at a school. And I ended up having a conversation with the superintendent of the school for the region, and I spoke with the head of diversity for the school, and I asked them, so what exactly are you guys doing to promote diversity? Besides, the one day of the year in February, or maybe you talk about Black History Month a little bit, but you kind of walk through some of the different events, and he says, we got to do a lot better. But it's like sexism. It is a long, long journey.
In closing, what is a message you would like to leave the world today?
On the gender front, I think for those of us that those of us being men, that can't quite, they're having a hard time with the emergence of female opportunity. You know, it's called get over it. This is a long time coming, and I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think it can happen fast enough. And you know, you look at the benefit of and how quickly women you know, can do well if given the opportunity. You look at the examples, and how can you even, you know, how can you not see that this is something that's right, and it's appropriate, and it's long overdue. So I think for the guys, it's called get over it. On the racism front, you know, I don't even know what to say there. I think that it's great to see the world kind of continuing to evolve. You look at some of the stuff that's going on culturally, where people are getting killed and stuff like that. You know, but as far as leaving a message, I think, you know, you go back to the old days when your mother gave you that example: treat others as you'd be treated, right? And it really is an old saying, but a very simple one. But I think that's ultimately that's
golden rule.
The golden rule.